Ladies and gentlemen of geometry, we are going to take a little sidestep and talk about special right triangles. These are very, very unique and very, very small sampling of triangles. Both of them are right triangles, and they are called 45, 45, 90 and 30, 60, 90, and those refer to the angle measures of those triangles. So by the time we're done, you guys should be able to be pretty familiar with those. So let's take a look at a square. Okay, everybody knows what a square is. Four equal sides, four right triangles, whatever. So how do you figure out the diagonal of a square? How can you use Pythagorean theorem to do that? Well, let's start off simple. So if I let each side be one, whatever, centimeter, meter, foot, inch, whatever, how could you figure out what the hypotenuse is? Well, it would be pretty simple, I would hope. 1 squared plus 1 squared equals, the hypotenuse squared. So that's going to be 2. So the hypotenuse then is going to be the square root of 2. And it's probably a good idea just to leave it at square root of 2 for now, because I don't want the decimal for this yet. So well, what if it wasn't 1? What if it was something bigger? So let's say it's 3. Let's say both of these guys are 3. So you're looking at 3 and 3. So using Pythagorean theorem, you would have 9 plus 9. So that would be 18. And now let's simplify square root of 18 once. So if I simplify the square root of 18, that splits into 9 and 2. So that's going to be 3 square root of 2. All right, so let's do one more, and let's see if you guys notice something here. So let's just go with 4. So 4 and 4, and we're trying to figure out the hypotenuse. So that'll be 4 squared plus 4 squared equals h squared. So 4 squared and 4 squared, so 16 plus 16 equals h2 or h squared. So that's 32. And if I simplify it, not to decimal, simplify it, so that'll split up into square root of 16 and 2, which square root of 16 is just 4. So that'd be 4 square root of 2. So let's take a look here. So when the sides were 1, the hypotenuse was just square root of 2. When the sides were 3, the hypotenuse was 3 square root of 2. When the sides were 4, the hypotenuse was 4 square root of 2. Hopefully you're starting to notice a little pattern here, and that's not coincidence. It actually does happen. It kind of follows the pattern that whatever the sides are, the hypotenuse is just going to be one side length times square root of 2. So it's always going to follow this ratio for 45, 45, 90. Okay, so this is 90. Diagonal cuts it in half, so that's 45, that's 45. So it always follows this pattern of x, x, x square root of 2. Okay, and I'll show you kind of a little bit of an algebraic way to help you solve this. So it's always going to be x, x, x square root of 2. So if you're given the legs, to find the hypotenuse. So if you're given the legs, all you have to do is take the leg and multiply it by square root of 2. All right, so whatever the leg length is, multiply it by the square root of 2. To figure out, if you're given the hypotenuse to figure out the legs, well, you would just do the opposite. So you would take the hypotenuse divided by square root of 2. But remember, you can't leave a square root of 2 in the denominator. Okay, that's not rational. So what I have to do is get that square root out of the denominator. So I do that by multiplying by that, which is technically 1. Okay, same thing over same thing just equals 1. So this is just going to be the hypotenuse times square root of 2 divided by 2. If you want everything in one simple step, that's going to be it. Take the hypotenuse times the square root of 2 divided by 2. So let's put this into practice here. So this has a 45, 45, 90. I know that because x and x are the same, 45, 45, 90. So my hypotenuse is 12. So what I want to do is realize that this kind of represents x square root of 2. So in my formula here, x square root of 2. So 12 is kind of representing x square root of 2. I want to figure out what just x is. So I'm going to solve this a little bit. Okay, so I get x equaling 12 over square root of 2. Can't leave it like that. If you leave it like that, you'll be wrong. So that'll be 12 square root of 2 over 2, which just becomes 6. So that means each leg is going to be 6 square root of 2. Now, if you look back on the previous page, all I said was take the hypotenuse times square root of 2 by 2. So 12 times square root of 2 divided by 2 is going to be 6 square root of 2. That's all I got to do. So figure out the value here. So 4 is a leg, makes this one 4. All I got to do is multiply by square root of 2. There's my answer. Here, 5 square root of 2. Here's where it's going to be interesting. Because what I say to do, I said take your hypotenuse, times it by square root of 2, divided by 2. But look, I've already got a square root of 2 in my hypotenuse. So here's where things get a little clever. 5 square root of 2 times square root of 2. I can rewrite this as square root of 2 times square root of 2. This becomes the square root of 4. Because I can multiply those two together, which is just 2. So that becomes 5 times 2 over 2, which is just 5. So those legs are just going to be 5. So find the height of this equilateral triangle. Okay, equilateral triangles mean all three sides are congruent. 60, 60, 60. Well, if I drop an altitude here, which is going to represent the height, what I end up doing is splitting these two in half. So I end up with a 30, 60, 90 triangle. Okay, now take a look here. So this becomes, so if I call this 1, 1, and this becomes a half, this becomes a half. Okay, so this becomes a half, this becomes 1. All right, so notice that relationship. The hypotenuse ends up being double the short side. Okay, hypotenuse ends up being double the short side. And to get this middle side, what I end up doing is multiplying by the square root of 3, and I'll show you what I mean. So let's back up here a second. Let me use a different example that'll kind of illustrate this a little bit better. So forget each side equals 1. Let's say each side equals 2. So when I draw my altitude, that cuts this in half, so that's 1 and that's 1. So it's still a right triangle. This is 2. This is 1. How can I figure out this? Well, let's use Pythagorean theorem. So it would be 1 squared plus b squared equals 2 squared. So this is going to be just 1. This would be 4. So if I subtract 1, it's going to be square root of 3. Okay? So that's not a coincidence. All right, if I do it again with a bigger number over and over and over again, that's going to be, that same thing is going to show up. Basically, in a 30, 60, 90 triangle, oh, that's 30, that's 60, sorry. In a 30, 60, 90 triangle, it goes short side is going to be half the long side. So long side will be double. Hypotenuse will be double the short side. Okay, short side will be half the hypotenuse. Middle side becomes short side times square root of 3. So middle side becomes short side times square root of 3. So take a look. A lot of different things can happen here. So you got 30, 60, 90. So short side, hypotenuse, middle side. So if given the hypotenuse to find the long leg, you would, if you're given the hypotenuse, so you're given this to find the long leg, which is this one, what you would do is you would take the hypotenuse, divide by 2, and multiply times the square root of 3. If you're given the short leg to figure out the hypotenuse, all you do is multiply by 2. If given the short leg, find the long leg, multiply by square root of 3. All right? Now, if you're given the long leg to find the short leg, you have to take whatever the long leg is, okay, so we'll call it LL, divided by square root of 3. But remember, you can't leave a square root in the denominator. So you want to take the long leg times the square root of 3 divided by 3. If given the long leg to find the hypotenuse, okay, you're going to do this step, long leg times square root of 3 divided by 3, but then you've got to double it, because this long leg times square root of 3 divided by 3 gave you the short side, and then you got to double it to figure out the hypotenuse. So if you're given the hypotenuse, find the short leg, divide by 2. Okay, so let's take a look at some of these here. So you got 30, 60, 90, figure out the values of x and y. So y is hypotenuse, x is the short leg. I'm given the medium leg. I'm given the leg across from 60. All right, so this is the long leg or the medium leg, whichever you want to call it. So to figure out the short leg, remember, 12 is kind of like x square root of 3. So I want to divide by square root of 3, but I can't leave it like that. That's wrong. So you got to multiply top and bottom by square root of 3. Square root of 3 times square root of 3 just becomes 3. So my short side becomes 4 square root of 3. All right, so 4 square root of 3. So that makes that 8 square root of 3, because all I had to do was multiply by 2. So now look back at your notes. What I say to do, if you're given the long leg to figure out the hypotenuse, take the long leg, times it by square root of 3, divide it by 3. All right, long leg times square root of 3 divided by 3. Once you got the short side, double it to get the hypotenuse. So find the values of x and y here. So here, these are kind of easy. 90 degrees, 10 is my hypotenuse. To get the short side, all I do is take 10 divided by 2. That's 5. To get the long leg, I'm going to take my short side times square root of 3. There's my short side. Here things get a little bit trickier, because I've got 30, 60, 90, but then I've got 30, 60, 90 inside as well. So 90. This means this is my hypotenuse. Interesting. So that's my hypotenuse. So to figure out my short side, I'm going to divide by 2. So 2 square root of 3 divided by 2 will give me this side. All right, so that means this is going to be just square root of 3. To figure out x, to figure out the medium side, remember what I said to do. Multiply by square root of 3, divide by 3. Now, square root of 3 times square root of 3 becomes square root of 9, which is a fancy way of saying 3. So when I do that, that means that x is just going to be 2. Okay, so now this is going to be 2. So take a minute and see if you can figure out what y is. If I change gears here, this is a 30, this is a 90. Okay, I know my 60 side is square root of 3. Okay, because that's what I figured out from the last triangle. So to figure out my short side, what I have to do is take my answer, multiply by square root of 3, divide by 3. Take my medium side, multiply by square root of 3, divide by 3. So this becomes square root of 9 over 3, which is just going to be 1. So after all that, x is going to be 2, y is going to be 1. That's all I got. Take your time with this. Make sure you are very specific with each one, and come talk to me with questions.